a bad kid?
I think I was full of it. I don't know why. I'm not now, of course.
Well, I guess you were little when you went to Mrs. Goodnight's funeral.
I was about 10, something like that. The only thing I can remember, it was at a little white Methodist church in Goodnight. And the main thing I remember was Colonel, when he came in, there was 2 big tears rolling down his cheeks, and one hit on the seat and just splattered. And as a kid, I thought that was the biggest tear I had ever seen. That's the only thing I remember, but it was Miss Goodnight's funeral. And I think that was about 1926, something like that. And I was about 10 or 11.
And what about your dad?
Well, Dad and Colonel were friends, and I remember going with Daddy over to the ranch, and he and Colonel would sit on the porch and visit, and Mrs. Goodnight would take me all around the yard, and she loved flowers, and she loved hollyhocks, and she would pick hollyhocks and give them to me, but they had no stems, you know, just the blossom, and I'd take all of those home and get wash tubs, fill them with water, and float those on there. And that was my hollyhocks that Miss Goodnight gave me, and Daddy would visit with Colonel. But I don't know, I don't know why they put up with me, but I'd go. But that's about all I remember.
And you had lots of picnics?
Now this is, I could just barely remember something about, I think Goodnight had a picnic every 4th of July, and we went down to the ranch. Everybody took picnic lunches, and as well as I can remember, they had flatbed wagons. They spread the food on. And I remember Mrs. Goodnight loved those, I think we called them Indian hats or something, those kind of flowers. They looked like hats. I don't know what they're called. Black-eyed Susans, I guess. Miss Goodnight loved children. I remember her more because she fooled with me. And then she also, did I tell you about her on Saturdays? She would buy boxes of Hershey candy, and she would go around all over town and give each one of the kids a Hershey bar. I do remember that.
What do you remember about the town of Goodnight?
I remember that I think there was over 300 people lived there. I remember the businesses. There was a rock mercantile. There was a grocery store, the drugstore, barbershop, bank. Mr. Sewell had a hardware store, blacksmith shop on the other side, phone office. Across the street was a Baptist church. And then when you went across the street was a cafe. And then you turned to go toward Clarendon, and there was a garage. And then across where the depot was, there was the big tank where they filled the trains filled with water, and Mr. Posey was a pumper, and the trains would fill with water there. And that's the way I understand why most of these towns out here are 30 miles apart. From Amarillo to Claude, 30. From Claude to Clarendon, 30. From Clarendon to Memphis, 30. From Memphis to Childress, 30. Because that's when the trains would fill with water. and they had the pumper stations there. We lived there. My daddy died, and Mother and I lived there until she married a man from Claude, and we moved here when I was a senior. And so then I graduated here at Claude.
So was Claude a lot different then?
Yes, what I can remember, of course, yeah, it was different, but it's grown a lot since then, but it's still Claude to me. And I know that when the folks had the grocery store and picture show, they said, little Bert Woodridge, he swore I was older than him, but he was older than me. We rode kitty cars up and down the street. His folks were in the bank, my folks were in the grocery store. I think that everybody in town knew me, from what I understand. They got me off the street. The story that I understand, my folks are buried there. It's up on the hill, and I understand that Colonel gave that site for the cemetery because he could see the ranch house from where he's buried. Colonel, he had visions of Goodnight being a big town. And people just, I don't know what happened. It just went away.
Do you know a little history of the theater?
I just remember that the folks came when I was a baby, and they ran it until they left here and went back to Goodnight when I was 4, which would have been in 19. And that's all I remember. They went back and Daddy farmed until he died. And then when I moved here, you know, a lot of people knew us, but I didn't remember them. Everybody just said, and you're an only child, and I'd say yes, and I'm spoiled rotten. I just finished it for them.